We are live now. Record with audio. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so lovely to see all of your names here joining us in the participants list. My name is Marika van der Steenhoven. I'm the Special Collections Education and Engagement Librarian here at the Bowdoin College Library. As Shana has done, you can see, you can join in and say hello, tell us where you're joining from in the chat. You'll just want to make sure that you select everyone from the little drop-down menu so everyone can see your questions, comments, or greetings. So again, you've joined us here for the monthly Audubon page turning. I just confirmed that it is indeed November 5th, the first Friday of November. It's unreal that we're already so far along. It's been a difficult week for us here in the library, but we're delighted to gather here in this community that comes together once a month and to see all of you. I'm so delighted about today's program, and I'm even more delighted that our guest speaker, Lisa Hibl, class of 1994, is here in person joining us today. Before we dive into today's program, I just want to let you know that our final page turning of this semester will be next month, December 3rd. The first Friday of the month, and we'll be joined by Professor of Art History, Susan Wegner. I'm really delighted to welcome her back. She's been a guest for our page turning in the past, and we're so excited to see her once more. We'll then take a break from page turnings and we'll reconvene in February 2022, which is, again, hard to imagine, but we look forward to seeing you there. Hopefully in person, but we'll wait and make that call closer to the date. So, as I mentioned, our guest speaker, who I'm so thrilled to welcome here today, is Lisa Hibl. I'm going to read her introduction I'm going to share a little bit about her with you. Then we'll switch the camera back, and Kat Stefko, our department director, who is just here off camera. You'll see her hands when we flip the bird. We'll do just that. We'll flip the bird, and then we'll turn things over to Lisa to share. Oh, it's so lovely. I'm seeing people jumping into the chat. So we've got folks joining from North Carolina, South Portland, Orono, Mid-Coast Maine, Freeport, Boston, Auburn. I'm so excited. Oh, and there's a note to you, Lisa, here. Linda Doherty is in the audience and says hello. So I'm so delighted to see all of your words and keep them coming. So Lisa grew up on Bailey Island in Harpswell, Maine. She studied literature at Bowdoin College, yay, and then completed an MFA in poetry at Arizona State University. After 2 years at the University of Delaware, she completed a PhD in English and American Literature at Brandeis University, focusing on the garden in American poetry. Long interested in landscapes and representations of place, she maintains a perennial garden as fieldwork. She's committed to mentoring students and to teaching innovative courses on literature and the arts, creative expression, and the environmental humanities. So again, we're so delighted to have Lisa here. When I change the camera, you'll actually, behind Lisa, you'll see this beautiful book that was a collaboration between Lisa and Rebecca Goodale that includes Lisa's poetry and Rebecca's prints. So we've hung that, that will frame Lisa's talk. But for now, I'm going to switch over the camera and we'll say goodbye to the October birds.
They're migrating.
They're migrating. Oh, that's so true. Okay, who are we saying goodbye to here? The carbonated warbler. I did get the t-shirt. Oh my goodness. Oh my. A big visitor. We have a very big visitor.
You want to switch the camera?
Well, let's. All right, here we go. Okay, so we have, yes. Shana says, whoa, in the chat, and it's so true. We are being visited for the month of November by the great horned owl. And now, it's over to you. So I'm going to just put them. Okay, so and then I'm going to give you a thumbs up. Oh yeah, we're going to close the case. I got it. And now you're live.
Okay. Wow, is right. What a pleasure to see the new birds, plural, pair of great horned owls. So I'm thrilled to be here. It's wonderful to be in the HL again. And I wanted to say just first that it's been since before the pandemic that I've had a chance to be in the library, and I miss it. So it's a wonderful thing to come back. And how especially wonderful to come back and have something familiar behind me to greet me, which I didn't know was going to be here. This is Rebecca Goodale's wonderful artist book with her print. And you can tell that there's a lot of colorful flower imagery here. This is the bee balm, Monarda, but then there's also a tiny little representation of the hummingbird down here. And indeed, she was working in collaboration with some lines from a poem of mine that was much, much, much longer. And she took 3 tiny stanzas and a closing question. So it was really fun to see that come together in tandem. So another thing that's very special about coming to the library in person, though other people must join us on Zoom, is that Bowdoin is been wonderful to me. So a shout out to anybody who is online at the time, including Linda Doherty or whomever. I had the pleasure of working when I was here, especially in art history and in the English department, and was able to merge some of those early interests since then. So I wanted to just say a couple of things about Audubon's reaction to this particular owl, and then something from one of his biographers about this depiction of the owl. And then I wanted to make 2 quick touch points on other literary responses and poetic responses to the owl, especially the great horned owl. And then I have a poem of my own that I'd like to read at the end. So I'll try to just be quick and move through. I found it interesting that Audubon describes this owl as both murderous and as a foe, as an enemy. And it seems that he was very taken by its hunting prowess. We understand even in our regular non-specialist bird lives, or relations to bird lives, that the owl, especially the great horned owl, is a rare sighting. It's not something that we get to see, but we might often hear it depending on what kind of environment you live in. I know that in the summer and in parts of the fall where I live, just north of Bath and Woolwich on the coast of Maine, very near a marsh, we can hear it, and sometimes it's very deceptive in its call in terms of how distant or close it might be. We really don't always know that. That's something that other people have said about this particular species. So Audubon's biographer, one of the more recent ones, William Souder, his book Under a Wild Sky, which really focuses on the making of the book, The Birds of America, said this: everything about the great horned owl interested Audubon, from its sailing flight to its ludicrous mating ritual, a weird hopping dance that the male initiates and the female then mimics as the birds snap their bills at one another. He loved birds of prey, and we know from seeing some of these other images over many months, or if you're familiar with any of them from another source or venue, that sometimes the prey animals are shown in great distress with some graphic precisions, can be quite disturbing. But the biographer continues, this portrait of the owl, easily the eeriest of all of his images, shows a pair perched passively on a mossy limb. With their enormous haunted eyes staring straight off the page, the birds look imperious, almost affronted, stony monuments to everything wild that stood before the onrush of humanity across America. So it can be difficult to read in the biography about so many birds that Audubon shot and then skinned or had skinned in order to bring them close enough to depict in such care and such precision. Interesting that one biographer interprets this particular image as a kind of passive resistance in the gaze that's very flat appearing in the pose. Henry David Thoreau didn't meet Audubon, but fascinating to me, in 1852, just a year after Audubon himself died, Thoreau stopped by the Boston State House to take a look at Audubon's Birds of America. And he was interested in seeing particularly identifying marks on the mourning dove and the passenger pigeon. And I'm fascinated by that bit of factual information because it is a writer stopping to look at an artist's depiction in order to get the identifying details to go back out into the field in his naturalist's day of pursuits to really keenly identify birds in their correct species. An interesting movement between expertise and different ways of seeing. Thoreau wrote a lot of interesting, poignant description of hearing owls in a part of Walden. He said in one spot in Walden, "I rejoice that there are owls. Let them do the idiotic and maniacal hooting for men. It is a sound admirably suited to swamps and twilight woods, suggesting a vast and undeveloped nature. They represent the stark twilight and unsatisfied thoughts which all have." So the owls and their sounds and the fact that we might hear them but not see them seems to be quite symbolic for Thoreau of something unutterable, hard to put into words, difficult to put into words, maybe not appropriate even for human language. That seems to connect, to my mind, very well with some aspects of poetry that are about song or about voice or about sounds that may or may not have bodies really focused inside them. Mary Oliver is a person that has recently passed. She passed away in 2019, but she has a couple of treatments of owls that I've found powerful to return to. She has a book, American Primitive, from 1978, where she has a striking poem called Owl and Crows. And I'm not going to read from it here, but I want to read a tiny bit from a later book of hers, 2003, called Owls and Other Fantasies. And this book of hers is a collection of some poems and a couple of short essays. She's looking all around Provincetown, Mass, for the great horned owl and its nest. She doesn't find it. And then she writes about the singularity of the size of the great horned owl being its most notable feature for her. She says, "The screech owl I can imagine on my wrist, also the delicate saw-whet that flies like a soft moth down by Great Pond. And I can imagine sitting quietly before that luminous wanderer, the snowy owl, and learning from the white gleam of its feathers something about the Arctic. But the great horned I can't imagine in any such proximity. If one of those should touch me, it would touch to the center of my life and I must fall. They are the pure, wild hunters of our world." Mary Oliver has a lot more to say about the owl, but though I have it in my notes, I have struck a line through it so that I can step away from some of these literary and poetic and scientific reactions to the great horned owl and respond in a little bit more personal way myself. So I'm going to read a poem that has a kind of a strange title at the moment, but I do like to think that maybe it is still in draft form, which is, I hope, less an apology than it is a nod to the richness of making that I always want to preserve in the final product. So it's often a balance of returning to something on the page and preserving the life in it. So I find some sympathetic connection with Audubon, maybe in that regard. So for now, this poem of mine is called Madonna of the Long Broken Neck. And I will say only as a note that it contains a few different birds. The great horned owl will come, but there are a few other birds here as well. And this title, Madonna of the Long Broken Neck, came to me. I'm not sure from where or why or how, but it does have some connection to me in my mind toward the Mannerist painter Parmigianino from about 1535 to 1540, who has a beautiful painting of the Madonna and Child in this Mannerist style where their necks and their limbs are very elongated. So somehow I'm thinking of that as well here. This one I carry out in my shirt between deck and green shade where I set it down. The light goes out of its eyes. I mean the one eye, dulls to a milky gray approximation of clam flats. The final sheen departs as I hover over it. I use present tense because this happens. I use the shirt because it wraps all the way around, and it's big enough that a stunned bird can't fly out, which happens. And because, though I crave it, I have a fear of the miracle of not touching, which is what happens when you touch the feathers, even the coarser ones with ribs along the edge. If I can't feel the feathers in the touching, what has happened? Is it that my hands, my fingertips, are too toughened to know that softness? Or that the softness is all we are, and being so close to nothingness, destined to disappear without notice? How do you say a softness so soft it can't be felt by action, but can be imagined? If the bird flew against my arm, my ulna, or toward my throat, my clavicle, with half the velocity it aimed at the window, would I be seeing stars, speaking in song? Does a body always make an impact, or never? I'm less interested in bodies than feathers these days, and the spattered fear in all corners of the house. Diet, something inky black, as of the thistle family, thin gruel before migration. On the morning the guinea hens cover their chicks with the ballast and slope of their bellies, clucking them through the barbed wire and receding into dappled shade, broken enough that even their black and white barring fades, I lose another wild one in the house. My ward, my trouble, my cat. If I confessed how many this season of wet heat and red snapdragons, he'd be arrested. The curled tail a giveaway, but not an alibi. Fair's fair, our liveliest, was taken by the king of birds at just 4 months. During a 3-day storm in November, long goodbye. This desire to sit low and flatten secrets into the marsh grass near the avant-garde brush piles of oak leaves and one shag bark hickory, like the carcass of a wrecked ship, revealed timbers akimbo, low tide, puts me in the path of house wrens landing and teetering and the flycatcher flipping its tail down in balance mode. Asters of two hues and long gone goldenrod that have sprouted extra and circling down with micro seeds inside. Food for winged things in all stages of life, even black crickets with their petticoats adjusting, their broken stapler moves lurching and freezing. They all have names in the book. It's the one caught in my throat I can't identify. The quiet one, who breathes when I breathe, who figures it's a good hiding place, far better than the glottal brush pile that will be burned soon anyway, the first damp day in October. It's a good hiding place in the day, but also in the night when those without nests anymore hang uncertainly and can't abide the quiet past 3 a.m. Those get sniped. Those bring the buzzards looking lazy, though they never decline a job. Those have misgivings about travel in a time of pandemic. When the owl hunting at night himself wears a mask, it's the back of his head. He is all oculus, an instrument of lenses. He passed physics with flying colors and knows how to find you. Still, not to worry when you can see him by the horns. When the wings lift back and up and his feet detach from the limb tight to the trunk, then you should have concern. King of birds. He enjoys to have you in any language. For he flies silent in a thing that's not flight, but black rushing void. It's what I hoped for her, what I hoped for you, maybe all of us, that he is in your chest before the first vowel escapes, that the shadow he casts is your own, that someone wraps you in a soft white shirt they have pulled off themselves in the suddenness of the strike, and they fold you in it so you can still see out, bring you catkins and leatrice and the white rind of pinecone parts. We gather fuzz from cat nine tails in the marsh for some reason. We just don't know what it is, or when, or when, or when.
I'm just gonna probably need to get closer. We're getting responses. Amazing poems. Over here. If you have questions for Lisa, please put them in the chat and I will relay them. Yeah? Okay. We're getting lots of. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. There's a question asking, what was the last word again?
When?
When?
When? Isn't that the last question?
Yeah. So thank you.
Lisa, did you get interested in birds through poetry? Or did you get, like, what's the relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Kat. I don't know. I think maybe whichever way it happens first, they both make you interested in the other
Yeah.
as you move forward. You know, I think about a literary tradition with poetry often associated with bird song. birds they have this song, but they also have the movement, and they lift above the earth. There's so many properties or affinities of birds that have some connection to the creative voice or creative arts. We think about John Keats and his nightingale, this famous embodiment of the muse or the poetic voice that's connected to emotion that may be wordless or ineffable. But they're endlessly fascinating, and I'm not an ornithologist or really even a very good birder, but they are constantly surrounding my life and flying through my life in the place that I live.
There's a comment from Glenn that says, how have the MacArthur Genius people not known?
Bren! Hi, Bren.
I agree.
I agree with that.
And another question, what inspires you to write?
Oh, sitting very low in the marsh on a warm fall day is what happens to be necessary sometimes. I like to be outside, and I like to be, it's like painting. I imagine it like painting in plein air. I have to be doing that outside usually. And then I can come back in and I can wrestle with things. But to achieve it, to have it in the first place, to have the occasion, it sometimes means that I need to be outside and in nature of some sort. So that's a very special part. I like to fold up bits of paper and put them in my pocket and have a pen in my other pocket and just be gone for a while.
Well, I think on that note, we should all go outside and enjoy this sunny Friday, find a marsh or another inspiring place in nature. There is one final question about if the poem you read is not published, would it be possible to acquire a copy to absorb it again?
Of course, I'd be delighted. It would be wonderful to hear from anybody. And maybe Marie could put my email in the chat.
Yes, I will absolutely do that.
A great way to reach out and connect.
Yes, fabulous. So lots of thanks coming to you from our community, and lots of thanks from us in the room for you joining us here today, and to thank all of you for joining us today. I'm just simultaneously pulling up Lisa's email to share with you. There it is. But I hope you will join us next month in February, which is our just February. Wow. This is why I can't do multiple things at once. There's Lisa's email. Now I will focus, and we're excited to see you in December and then February. So thanks so much, and we will sign off.